Thank you very much for having me. I had the pleasure and honor to have take part in other Banyas, and it's really a great forum for discussion, and it's very intellectually stimulating because the discussions are really very interesting. Well, I have only 10 minutes and lots to talk. So, Mark, feel free to interrupt me if you feel that I'm going beyond my time. So, this Banya has four main questions, and I'm going to try to address each one of them. And let's start with what are the possible scenarios to Putin? And with this question, I understand we have two sub questions. One is what Putin wants in Ukraine, and the second one, what are the tactical or rather what are the strategic objectives of Putin overall? And let me start with the second one. That for Putin right now, and this has been quite clear for several months, is that Russia is at war against the West. Some people might think I'm exaggerating, but if you read the official statements of the Kremlin, if you read the speeches of the Russian government officials, it's clear that that the main point is the so-called multipolar world that started with Putin back in 2007, like the famous speech during the Munich Security Conference. Then Dmitry Medvedev repeated the same idea in 2008 at the German parliament. And then there is this repetition of the necessity of the world becoming multipolar against what they believe is what Krauthammer called the unipolar moment back in the 1990s. And for doing that, Putin, he's been trying to construct, he's been trying to establish some sort of Russian empire renewed, let's put it this way, because many people believe that Putin wants to renew, to reproduce the Soviet Union. And of course, there is this famous statement that the fall of the Soviet Union was the biggest tragedy in the 20th century. But Putin wanted to do that not by occupation, not by annexing Ukraine, Belarus, Kazakhstan, or even the Baltic states, but Putin's idea was to make it happen in a soft way by emulating the Russian version of the European Union, the so-called Eurasian Union, which miserably failed because first, of course, without Ukraine, it cannot happen because Ukraine is a key player, but also because until now the only countries signing the agreement of this Eurasian Union were Belarus and Kazakhstan. The other countries avoided a deeper integration with Russia, although many of them have signed some of the cooperation agreements prior to the Eurasian Union. So in this sense, Putin is unable to recreate the Russian Empire and not the Soviet Union, because after all, the Russian elite has no ideology, and the Soviet Union was, by definition, an ideological construct, and therefore the idea of reproducing the Russian Empire by soft means, like by the Eurasian Union, failed. Nevertheless, if we talk more specifically about Ukraine, Ukraine is a big red line for Russia. And Putin made this very clear several times a long time ago. and even the involvement of Russia against, for example, not only Maidan but against the Orange Revolution, the poisoning with radioactive excuse me, the poisoning with, if I remember correctly, it was even some radioactive substance of the former Ukrainian President Yushchenko, and they all made these things. They made clear that Ukraine is a very big red line for Putin, for Moscow, and therefore this military intervention against Ukraine, or this war, or the escalation of the war, because let's remember that the war has been going on since 2014, and now it's just an escalation, in a certain manner reflects that the calculation of cost benefit in Moscow changed. And as a result, they concluded that they were strong enough, first, and second, that taking into consideration that Ukraine was increasing its capabilities, and both in terms of training and in terms of hardware and equipment, the Kremlin concluded that this time would be maybe the last chance to put Ukraine on its knees and to appoint a puppet as president, and so on and so on. And but for doing that, the choice of a military escalation, as we have been seeing since February, reflects a very poor strategic planning at the operational level. And that's clear since all the presuppositions that Putin had, and I'm saying Putin because in reality there are very strong indications that basically Putin, Shoigu, and probably Gerasimov were the only ones knowing about the operation. The FSB was put aside, the SRV was put aside, and therefore they planned this operation. And they had very poor fundamentals and very poor intelligence, as for example, the idea that the Ukrainian people would receive them with open arms, which as we see, it's not exactly the case. It's quite the contrary. So if you divide the military operation in two parts, like the first part was like until they retreated from Kiev, and the second part is now that they are starting still to attack, to make a very harsh operation against eastern Ukraine. So the first part failed miserably, and this, of course, then we need to ask ourselves, and why? Well, one of the biggest problems with the Russian military that we're seeing is that although they have a quite flexible and modern doctrine that they call new generation warfare, there's a significant gap between doctrine and the operational level, first, and second, also there is a gap with the modernization of the armed forces, because this modernization that started back in the beginning of the 2000s, in reality, at the end of the day, it became more or less like a pakazura, let's put it this way. That's like a demonstration, because as I remember the last time I was in Russia in 2018 and I visited the army conference and Congress and demonstrations, most of the equipment they were modernizing and were Soviet equipment, like a very, very few really modern equipment being developed. Then, like, of course, there is corruption, there is incompetence, and but there is really a problem of bad planning overall, and it's not about the operation in Ukraine, but of planning as for example, and I'm entering now the second question, like what lies ahead for the Russian state and the military-industrial complex, that that the relationship between both actors always has been quite complicated because on the one hand, the military always complained that the Russian industrial military complex was unable to supply products with quality and that would really attend the necessities of the armed forces. And but on the other hand, the industrial military complex always complained that the Russian military don't know that the Russian armed forces don't know what to procure. And therefore, they are at odds. They always been at odds. And this is aggravated by the fact that most of the Russian technology is still Soviet technology. The idea that Shoigu and Putin had about making some sort of import substitution within a broader industrial policy to modernize Russia using the military sector as one of the main arms also failed because they been unable. Like they were convinced that basically it would be enough to exploit the spillovers of oil and gas and without investing much in research and development, and at the same time using imported technology from the West. And now, because of the sanctions, this is really a very important, a very significant issue because, for example, the factory producing the T-72s, like the Ural Wagon Zavod, they stopped production because they don't have parts anymore. The Sukhoi 34, around 2/3 of the spare parts come from abroad. So they will be unable not only to produce new ones, but also to maintain these aircraft. And this is quite problematic, meaning that Russia is unable to make a protracted war in Ukraine, as many believe, because they don't have the economic resources to do that. And that's another point that, going to the third question.
Sorry, Janis, 2 to 3 more minutes, okay? But
yes, I'm following here, but thank you for letting me know. So, and then going to the third question about what are the likely outcomes for the Russian economy and society, the fact is that the Russian economy is more or less of like a Brazil, like a Russia could be in Latin America, for example, because it exports commodities, it's quite underdeveloped, it is dependent of foreign technology, and still it has a big problem with technology, as I mentioned before, and that's too dependent of foreign technology, and is still until now it's been unable to really develop new technologies. The hypersonic missiles, for example, is an example. I may discuss this later. And there is a demographic issue. So, by all means, in economic terms, Russia is to face a very Russia is a decadent power in economic terms, and we're going to see this even in the short term. We can see this more. This is going to be more visible. Okay, now the fourth question, and to finish in time, how should NATO prepare for dealing with Russia in the future? I think, to put it shortly, NATO has to understand that Russia, even though it's a decadent power in economic terms, it's a revanchist power. And let's say power because they have nuclear weapons, is still, although quite incompetent, they still have, okay, not really incompetent, but like not what many people imagined, it still has a capable armed forces. And Russia is to create many problems, not only by military means, but by non-military means in some sort of what the West calls hybrid warfare. And then we have a very good question, and I'm going to finish with this question, is how do we deter Russia engage in non-direct military actions against the alliance? Thank you.
Thanks very much.